This is a viewer requested prop. Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name's Ryan, or RJR Productions, and today I'll be showing you how I made my Airborne Trooper helmet. The first thing I did for this Airborne Trooper helmet is I made the dome on the top. So this dome is the same as most of my previous props. So it's just a bar around the edge, a strip of cardboard that's about 26 inches long. This gives you a bit of free room in the inside if you want to put padding or anything else. And then I just add a strip to the top, and then I add 2 strips for the sides. And this is a good base for you to start working on the rest of the helmet. So I just took a piece of cardboard and I rolled it up, and then I just glued this on the side, and so the seam would be on the side. Then I just wrapped it all the way around and then filled in the little gap that was left, and then I traced out the visor. At first, I thought the visor was about right, but then it looked too long, but the original visor shape ended up being pretty good. So this visor is actually pretty wide, and you want it to be wide. You don't want it to be too short, because it's less accurate like that. I just took my time, and I traced it out, and I also cut it out. But one thing that I did is I ended up tracing this out where the inside of the dome was, so I also had to cut that out, and just took extra time, and I could have avoided that if I tried. Then I started working on the snout where all those details go. This has a very unique shape. It's a little bit slimmer than the ARF Trooper helmet, actually a lot slimmer, and it has these jagged edges to it. So I just held up a piece of paper and I traced out the rough shape. Then once I was happy with it, I started working on those tubes on the sides. So I just glued some rectangles of cardboard on it at an angle to where they'd curve outwards so you could see the inside of it. And then I just glued on a little space or filler in between so it would cover up and you wouldn't be able to see inside of the tube, and also so you could glue on some details later on. I just took my time and made sure to fill in all of the small gaps on the inside of the snout, and I spent a little bit of time on this just because this is the main part of what you're going to be looking at. So there's some gaps that were on the inside. I just cut some triangles of cardboard and I glued those on, and then also I filled in the tubes about 1/4 of an inch or less close to the edge so that there would be a little lip on the edge, but you could also put a detail in there and you'd still be able to see it. Then I started making the tube go backwards, so I just trimmed the edge and just worked it out. And this was actually pretty simple. It's a pretty repetitive process, so if you're going to be doing this, probably pull up a movie or just something to watch, because it's kind of boring, but it's very simple. So I just worked my way out all the way across the back, and I took a rectangle of cardboard, maybe no longer than 2.5 inches, 3 inches long. And I just cut off the edges, the corners, so it would be able to curve and sit next to the piece right next to it. And also, since there's a divider in the back, the 2 sides don't need to be perfectly the same shape, but try to keep them the same size, because if they're not, then you're going to be able to tell, and one of the sides is going to look a little bit thicker than the other. And also with these, instead of gluing them on the inside, I would glue them to the top, then I would roll them down and glue them to the bottom. And then I would glue the side and fill that in with some hot glue, just because that doesn't need to look too good. It just needs to cover up the gap, and then I can spackle over it later. Then I just worked all the way back, and on the back it kind of tapers in to where it's almost flush with that back detail, so I just kept that in mind. It was pretty simple. I just made sure to go slow. Then, after I had that done, I started working on the lip that would go above it, but then I decided to start working on the back just because it would be a little bit easier to get placement. So I basically cut out this square with 2 long rectangles off of it, and I just added some edges because this is supposed to be sticking out about 1/4 to 1/2 an inch. And then once I was happy with that and I cut a little curve out of the top, I glued that on and I just filled in some of the remaining edges on the inside. It was pretty simple. I just took a piece of cardboard and I cut off 2 of the layers. There's 3 layers on a piece of cardboard, so it would just be the top paper layer, not the corrugation or the bottom paper layer. And that's a really good way to get some nice clean seams. Then, once I was happy with that, I glued a circle in the middle of the top of that, And then I worked backwards from there to the edge of the other ring, just to make the tube at the back more coherent and smooth. The top edge of this tube needs to be fairly smooth because there's going to be a layer of cardboard resting on top of it, and you don't want too many gaps in the cracks. And then I just finished the whole back tube. Now I have this whole ring done all the way around the back, and I also have this second ring done right above it. So now I'm just going to work on a third one that is up here, and that goes all the way around to about here, and it curves up like that. Then after I have that done, I just need to fill in the dome, and then I can spackle. A really good way to make it look like this piece is thicker than it actually is at the very front, curve it to make it more of a semicircle, but then the back half can be completely flat. It just needs to look like that there's a tube on the inside. And then I just wrapped that piece all the way around to the back, and I trimmed it off about 1/4 of an inch away from that back detail. Then I just repeated the same thing on the other side, and I just made sure that there was a little gap there. I ended up covering it up because I didn't like the look of it, but then I started finishing up the dome. So this is the same exact process as my past 4 helmets. It's just fill in the 4 corners of it with some bigger pieces of cardboard, and then once you have those filled in, you just trim the tops to make them flush, and then you just fill in the remaining gaps with more pieces of cardboard. So just glue a piece of cardboard on, but before you do that, hold it up to the shape and then trace it out so you get the perfect exact shape. And make sure to cut on the outside of your pen lines because your pen lines won't exactly be the perfect shape. Again, these seams don't need to be exactly right. They don't need to be perfect because you're most likely going to be covering over it. I use spackle for mine, but you could paper mache or you could use Bondo. That's what I'm probably going to use in the future, but it's a little expensive and I don't have access to that yet. Also, I picked off all of the small hot glue bits that would stick out just because it would be harder to spackle over all those. So if you just remove them with your fingernails, then it would be easier. I just finished the whole back half, and this took me a while. The dome and the tube around the back are probably my least favorite parts about this helmet, just because they're a little boring to construct, but it ends up looking really cool in the finished product. So I just worked through it. Also, for those main 4 corner pieces, if you bend the bottoms a little bit, then it'll glue nice curve over it. So if you do that, then it'll look pretty nice, and it'll have a nice curve going up to the top of the helmet. Now that I have these 2 side scoops on both sides that taper off to the back, kind of like that, and I also have the whole dome nice and filled in, the next step is to cut the channel that goes right here on the back and just goes all the way around. So I'm going to do that. The placement of this channel at the back is directly above the 3rd layer or tube at the top. So I just rounded that off, made it about 3/4 of an inch tall, and then just wrapped it all the way around to the opposite side. Then once I was done with that, I took a piece of cardboard and I just glued that on the inside to make it a nice little inset that would look pretty good once it was painted a different color. Now that I have this nice channel cut into the back, all I need to do now is spackle. So I need spackle over this whole ring on the back, mostly just over the seams, and then on the top on all of these seams as well. Then, after I have that done, I can prime it with some filler primer, then mask, and then paint. A helpful tip for using spackle or Bondo is to get a cup of water. It doesn't matter what the temperature is, but just use that to smooth out your spackle marks. It'll save you a lot of time for sanding. On my Ironman Mark 85 helmet, I actually didn't use water, and I ended up doing 3 to 4 layers of filling and sanding versus my Clone Trooper helmet, which I used some water, and that ended up working great, and I only needed 1 coat. And the ones since that one have also only needed 1. So now I'm just going to hit this helmet with a little bit of sandpaper. This is 220 grit, so I'm just gonna do that, blow it off with an air compressor, and then prime it. When I sand these helmets, I usually do it in a circular motion, and that just helps avoid any deep grooves that can happen if you just do straight lines. And the higher the grit, the smoother it'll be, so if you have some pretty high spots, you can start with a 70 to 100 grit, and then if it's pretty low and you just want to polish it up and make it nice and smooth, then anything over 150 to 200 grit, or even higher than that, would work great. I just used 220 because that's the highest grit I had. Then I went over the whole helmet with some filler primer, and I made sure to get that whole bottom lip because sometimes you can miss that if you don't lift it up and get the underside. Then I just painted orange because I'm doing 212 markings. Now that I have this whole helmet masked off with the 2 stripes on the top and then a little bit of orange down at the bottom, and this gray is masked off at the back, I can now go ahead and paint the whole thing with white. So the reason why I paint the color for the detail colors on first is so it uses a lot less masking tape. If you painted the whole thing white and then you masked off everything except for these small details, you would use a lot more masking tape. So that's why I did this. It's just a lot more efficient, and it saves me a trip to the hardware store to go get some more of this. So now I'm just going to paint the whole thing gloss white. I chose to do 212 markings because to me that's the most iconic version of the Airborne Trooper helmet, but if you're going to make this you could do any markings you want. I just chose to do these ones. Now that I'm back inside from having the paint all dried and also having all the details that would go in there being nice and dried, I'm going to weather the whole helmet. So for this part of the helmet, it is just a black wash over the whole thing. And then for these, they don't need a black wash. I'll just use some silver acrylic paint to make the edges just shiny to make them look like they're made of metal. So I'll be back when that is done. Now that I am done weathering this whole helmet, and I have glued in all of these weathered details on the inside, the only step left is for me to put some clear plastic on the inside of the visor. So for me to get it a nice black tint, I just take a Sharpie and I just color it on the inside so that it remains shiny on the outside and you can still look through it. So that offers a nice way to have a shaded visor that you can see out of but people can't see in. So after I do that, that'll be it. Now that I have attached the visor in there, this helmet is done. I also added some black pieces of cardboard on the sides there just to extend the vent look. But yeah, that is it. That is how I made my Airborne Trooper helmet. So now I'll cut to the outro. This project was really fun to make, and I highly recommend that you make it too. The next project I'll be making is another requested prop. It is a galactic marine helmet. If you have any suggestions on what I should make next, please leave them in the comments down below. This has been RJR Productions, signing off, till next time.